All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to True Crime Loser. How you doing today? That sounds awesome. So the Daybells are on the move. For the first time in a couple months, they left their gated community Kauai hideout and went an island over to Maui. And then yesterday, they went back to Kauai. And I have a feeling their once hidden gated community existence feels a lot less secret now that a 2-hour-long Dateline episode aired about it. Nothing blows up your spot quite like a 2-hour-long Dateline episode. And something that stood out to me about the big Daybell Dateline 2-hour extravaganza episode that aired last Friday is in interviews leading up to it, even before that it aired, Keith Morrison in interviews was saying that this Daybell thing is unlike any mystery that they have ever seen. You know you've had a hell of a year when Dateline looks at everything that's happened, and even they're like, we haven't seen anything like this before. My God. And it's wild to think about. Like in November, the law enforcement in Idaho did a welfare check on Tylee and JJ. The next day, Chad and Lori went to Hawaii, and for weeks, at least in Hawaii, they were just there on their own. No one knew they were there. They weren't famous. Hey, let's go eat some dinner, have a coconut drink, and think how far they've come in a few months. There's a 2-hour-long Dateline episode about you that comes out. That's got to be a surreal feeling. And the whole Dateline episode culminated in hearing that they moved into a hotel, that they had possibly had flight tickets to Mexico, and they had all this cash on them. So the Dateline crew, who had been there for weeks, rushed to the hotel. They stake it out for 9 hours, and then finally 9 hours later, Chad and Lori come out. We get the same type of interview that we're accustomed to, where it's just them walking, saying things like, leave us alone, no comment, why an interviewer is going, do you know where your kids are? Where are they? Are you worried about them? And it's just like, yeah, no comment. And there's a pretty good chance that Lori and Chad watched their own 2-hour Dateline in a corny beach-themed hotel in Hawaii that's past its prime with the depressing blue glow of the TV. You know your life's in the toilet, too, when it's the full 2-hour. You know, maybe they didn't know. I was laughing at the thought of maybe they didn't know it was the full 2-hour Dateline. And they were like, you know what? The big Dateline about us premieres tonight. They're going to be mean. They're not going to be fair to us. Let's just skip it. You know, it's going to be stressful. We don't want to watch it. Let's just go get some dinner. We'll have a nice night. We'll come back. It will be over. We'll just let it pass and fade away. And we'll watch a little TV and turn in for an early night. And so they go out to dinner and have, a drink, and they come back an hour and a half later thinking it's over. They're like, oh, surely it's over. We'll watch a little TV, we'll unwind, and we'll go to bed. And they turn on the TV, and it's just Keith Morrison being like, it's only the beginning. And they're like, Jesus, how long is this thing? A 2-hour event. I can't believe where they're at in life, just watching their own Dateline. And then, so it's like, man, I can't believe where they're at. And then you read some of Chad's dystopian fiction. I've been checking it out the past couple days. And then you go, oh, this is why they're at where they're at. Got it. All right. I think before the Dateline, I had thought that they were both into the end game prepper podcast world, but maybe Lori was the more crazy one, and she brought Chad up to her level. After reading this dude's writing, I think that it's amazing that these two found each other. Also, it's hilarious to me, after seeing Chad's theories and outlook on life, that anybody would say, wow, this guy is attractive. This guy's making a lot of sense. Leave it up to Lori to hear this nonsense and be like, this is the man that I've been looking for. But I'm going to I'm going to read some of Chad's writing because you really get to see a window into this dude's thought process. All right, so first, this is the description of a book called Living on the Edge of Heaven by Chad Daybell. And if you've looked into Chad at all, he's got this theory that we all have a veil that blocks us from the spirit world. And his veil is partially open, which this description explains that. All right, here we go. An unusual connection to the spirit world. When Chad Daybell was 17 years old, he had a near-death experience while cliff jumping. He crossed into another dimension and realized there was a world beyond this one. Dun, dun, dun. A second near-death experience in his early 20s was much more in-depth. He was hit by a monstrous wave in La Jolla, California. La Jolla Cove in California. While his body was being tossed by the wave, his spirit was visiting with his grandfather, who showed him future events involving his still unborn children. This accident caused his veil that separates mortal life from the spirit world to stay partially open, so he often feels as if he has a foot in both worlds. All right, Chad, I think you're being a little overdramatic with this one. Who hasn't been wiped out by a wave so hard you met your grandpa? You know, anybody that's swam in the ocean, even for a little bit, has been wiped out by a wave. I mean, it takes a special form of just delusions of grandeur to just be wiped out by a wave and to be like, oh my God, I have one foot in the spirit world. I met my grandpa. All right, so that's the description of that book. And so that one came out in 2017. And this is the description of his latest effort. And then I also downloaded a sample of this one that I've been reading. All right, so here's this one. This book is called Times of Turmoil, Book 4, Reclaiming Liberty. After a long winter, the coalition leaders have gathered in Denver to complete their invasion of the United States and establish a new society. However, the coalition leaders are unaware that the elders of Israel are fully prepared to defend their lands and liberty. As the snow melts, these righteous soldiers begin their journey to Denver to battle the coalition forces. The fate of the nation hangs in the balance. Meanwhile, thousands of citizens have fled the West Coast and are making their way inland. Members of the Foster and Shaw families help these people find hope by guiding them to places of refuge that will someday become cities of light. As the time of turmoil come to a close, hearts are softened and the veil is thin as the saints prepare to fully establish Zion. Oh, buddy. I don't know anything about end times prepper theology, but I feel like it's never a good idea to fully establish Zion. That just sounds ominous, right? And so, you know, it said in the Dateline episode, Lori and Chad meet at this prepper convention, and they're on the end times prepper podcast together, and this line right here where it says, members of the Foster and Shaw families help these people find hope by guiding them to places of refuge that will someday become cities of light. And here's the thing is, I don't know, I haven't gotten too far into this book yet, but I would imagine that the Foster and Shaw families that are going to help these people are prepper Mormon families, and they're going to help the pathetic, non-prepared, hungry other people. Like in the first few pages, this guy walks out of his office and winter is ending, and he's like, I am bored, I have cabin fever from the winter. And so he tells his driver, he goes, drive over to where that smoke is coming up. And they drive over to where the smoke is, and it's just a bunch of pathetic, non-prepared people. and that are hungry, and the guy gets out and goes, "Who's the leader?" And no one steps forward, and then the guy goes, "All right, well, I'm going to take all this food that I was going to give." Basically goes, "Someone better come out and hang out with me. I have cabin fever, or I'm going to take all this food." And then someone comes out, and he ends up like feeding everybody. But the prepper community, there's a smugness to it where it's like, we're prepared and you're not, and you have no idea what's coming, and you deserve what's coming to you. And I have a little bit of insight into the prepper community because a few years ago I went down a YouTube prepper video wormhole. And this actually isn't the first prepper dystopian novel that I've read. And how I came to read a different dystopian prepper novel is, there's a show, I think it's still going, I don't watch it anymore, but there's a show called Alone, and it's a pretty interesting show where survival experts and preppers and people that teach survival and wherever they live, or people that are really good at camping, they apply to the show to try to be a contestant. And then the show picks 10 people that are the most qualified, really good at camping and all the stuff that comes with it. And then those 10 people, usually it's 5 men, 5 women, really talented at making it alone in the woods. And so the 10 men, 10 women, they get to pick 10 items, which is a fun game. There's a list of a bunch of things that you can pick, and you get 10 items. So a few of the things that pretty much everybody picks is a really warm sleeping bag, a pot to cook the little food that you are able to produce from the woods, a knife or an axe or something to chop firewood. So they pick 10 items, and then the show spreads them all out in the woods. They pick a location for each season, and whoever survives alone the longest they give you like a little walkie-talkie thing that if you press a button, it's you giving up, and then they come and get you. Whoever gives up last wins $500,000. So it's a cool show because you get to see really talented, creative people catch fish and build these awesome shelters and stay out there alone for months. And as hard as it is physically to keep a fire going and to chop all the wood that you need to keep a fire going and to produce your own food, mental is probably just as hard or the harder. Even a night or two in, everybody's lonely and crying. Like, you don't understand how dark and lonely the woods get when you're out there by yourself, especially for long, like months. You start missing your family. You need a hug. You want to see your dog. It gets pretty low out there, but that's part of it. You got to stay strong mentally, strong physically, build yourself a shelter, feel everybody's weight is a total free fall. Everybody loses weight constantly. But the people that can, not lose weight so fast, catch fish, know the plants in the area, eat, they really show off their skills, right? And the reason I quit watching it is because you pretty much see how it plays out after a few seasons, and it's pretty much the fat guy wins because he has more weight to give. Like one of the seasons, the last ones I watched, this probably the most talented contestant of any of the seasons I watched was this woman in her 20s from Canada. She had such a sweet shelter. She was really good at getting food. She made all these baskets. And the final 2 contestants were her and just this fat guy, and his shelter kind of sucked, and he hadn't really found any food in weeks, but he had all this body fat to live off of. So while she was killing herself to get more food and to keep the whole thing going, he was kind of just relaxing, staying hydrated, and then finally she lost so much weight that the show didn't feel like she was healthy and pulled her out. They can like medically tap you out for you. And then the guy who had lost all his weight and looked great just was like, all right, awesome, and won. And so not the most talented always wins. It's after a few seasons, it's like, oh, a big store of body fat is very important. So if you think you're going to go somewhere where you might be stranded, try to gain like 100 pounds before you go. It could be important. But why I explained all of that is in the first season, a predominant member of the prepper community was picked as a contestant. And just like Chad, this guy goes by A American, Angry American is his author's name. And so just like Chad, he writes dystopian prepper novels. And so I was interested. So I downloaded one of his novels and I read it. And it pretty much reads similar to Chad's, like his prepper jerk-off fantasy, where it's like you can tell pretty much he just wrote himself as the main character, and the main character had absolutely zero weaknesses or pitfalls and always knew exactly what to say and was always totally prepared and totally badass. And at like one point, the main character runs into these military guys and they're totally blown away by how tactically trained he is. And just the whole book kind of sucked because it's totally unrealistic to have a main character that has zero weaknesses and just is the ultimate prepper badass. But what I learned, and then I ended up watching a bunch of prepper YouTube videos, but what I learned is there's two types of preppers. One are very smug, and they're like, I've bought all the gear and stored the food, and you didn't, so I am better than you, and once the shit hits the fan, I'm not helping you, and you're just going to be sad and pathetic. Or maybe I will help you and give you a little food, but it's going to be totally because I want to feel good as the person that is prepared and help. Like when it says the Shah family, I guarantee you they're the well-fed prepper family, and they're going to help the pathetic, non-prepared people. But anyway, so he writes this book where he's the ultimate badass. The military is blown away by how cool he is, the whole thing. And then he was on alone. So it's like, all right, he writes all these books where has zero weaknesses. Let's see how he does on a night out in the forest by himself. And he did worse than anyone on any season of the show. So first night he's out there, people make it months, 90 days. And he made it a mere few hours. The big prepper badass that writes all these stories about how cool he is was chopping wood in like the first right when he got there, and a branch broke off and like hit him in the head. It looked like a Three Stooges skit. He's like, oh, fuck. Hits him in the head. And then he builds this shelter, and that night he hears scary sounds in the night that are wolves or something, and he starts crying and taps out. And why I told that story is I get the same smug delusions of grandeur from Chad and Lori. I think that they think that they're these badass, prepared soldiers about ready to fully establish Zion, and really they're just these sad, pathetic cultists that are at the brutal wheels coming off end of the road, and they're sitting there in Hawaii. They've just been mainlining end of the world, prophetic, the high of thinking it's the end of the world has got to be pretty good. And after you've been just mainlining it for years, probably just going back to like, all right, maybe we were wrong and it's just not the end of times isn't going to do it for them. So I don't know. I'm going to keep following it. Oh yeah, an ex-FBI agent was interviewed on East Idaho News about why they haven't been arrested, and I was like, oh my God, I've been wondering this. Maybe this will clear it up, and it only made it even more confusing. It's like, the guy was like, why haven't they been arrested? Everyone wants to know. And he was like, well, that does make sense that people are thinking that, but why? What would the crime be? That's what he said. He goes, what would the crime be? The kids are missing, but what does that mean? And it's like, what? Is this just bizarro world? Why is it only crazy to us that they haven't been arrested yet? But I don't know. I'm going to keep following it. I hope you're having a good week. I'll see you next time. Why, Steven, why? Last question.